Hello and welcome to the Warhammer Podcast, episode 164. I'm your host, Brad. This is my co-host, Eric.
How's it going?
If we sound weird this week, we're in the 3 months of the year in which Michigan attempts to kill us.
Yeah, I mean, more than usual.
Yeah.
It is allergy season.
But we have a big episode this week. We're doing a fan favorite of finding the most expensive and cheapest army.
Yeah, and we're doing it in AOS this time.
So since this is a big episode, let's just jump right in.
Sounds good. All right, we said jump right in, but let's handle the rules before we really jump fully into the data.
And let's talk about how we got this data while we're here. So first off, as with the 40k version of this that we did a year ago,
maybe a little bit more,
we're going to have basically the same rule structure. No legend stuff is going to be included in these numbers.
No Forge World. Hey.
Yeah, it's easier on AOS end. But we're also going to dodge all of the combo boxes unless there is no way to get a model outside of that combo box, and then we'll do the funky math to figure it out.
Yeah, it just makes it cleaner to figure out dollar per point kind of stuff, or here's what GW's putting it, because value boxes can go in and out, and how do you split it up and all that stuff. So just nice and clean. We're not doing that unless necessary.
And all the numbers we're talking about will be Games Workshop, manufacturer, suggested retail price, which is called MSRP, so that we don't get 400 copies of that comment. For you Europeans, it's called RRP, for recommended retail price.
Wow, getting ahead of the comments.
I know.
And being informational on a podcast. This is wild.
But that's what we're going to base everything on. However, as the lovely patron who made this data put on the title page for it, as a reminder, you can get everything cheaper than GW retail if you're new here. Literally in the US, just go on Amazon. GW sells their stuff cheaper on Amazon than on their own website.
And you can find additional discounts at other places in the US, even beyond that.
Yes. And UK, Australia, Canada, all of them have examples of this. And to swing into this data was collected by a single patron. When we did this for 40k, I enlisted an army of patrons to help me fill this data out.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
One singular patron, who goes by the name of Lord Lazarus, has upkept this for 6 months now for the AOS community, specifically making it so we would make an episode about it. He even did such a good job. He shills our merch on the main page of this. We don't even remember to do that every episode. The only reason I'm mentioning it now is because it's here. This is genius.
Hell yeah. Always leaving it up to the patrons and viewers to remind us to do our job, essentially.
But we are going to link the data in the show notes / description / pin comment, YouTube, wherever, so that you can go look at it all and have fun with it.
Yeah, thank you for putting it together.
I will not promise it will ever be updated again. If Lord Lazarus keeps up with it, that's amazing. Lord knows I didn't with the 40k stuff. There was a price hike after that episode, and I peaced out.
Yeah.
You can all figure out the 40k one again, and then we can do a follow-up episode one day, but got too many things on our plates to be upkeeping random Excel documents.
Yeah, so we're not going to be trying to upkeep this, and there's no guarantee that Lord Lazarus is going to either, which is totally fair. It's a lot of work, but yeah, really appreciate it getting put all together in this nice little format, and definitely take a look at the link that should be in the show notes or pin comment or wherever.
But it is time for us to get all Auspex tactics up in here and talk about a bunch of numbers.
Hell yeah, let's whip out the white background PowerPoint.
You don't even have to say that, because I know on YouTube he already threw the fucking grenade. All right, so let's start off. Before I read the actual data here, let's do some guesswork. So we've got 24 factions in front of us. Do we have any predictions for cheapest and most expensive before reviewing the results?
I mean, I've got a couple predictions, but a lot of what I would expect is based on intro boxes and Spearhead, because that's mostly what I'm familiar with on the AOS side. And since we're not doing that, it's a bit tricky, but I would say Stormcast should be on the cheaper side, I would expect.
I can at least say I expect all of the numbers to be way better than 40k, for the simple fact that points are much higher in AOS. Army size is smaller at 2,000 points. So in a vacuum, if you were to compare the two episodes, 40k would look ludicrously expensive, because it is. Yeah. But it would look ludicrously expensive compared to all the stuff we're about to look at, is my guess. We may have been under 1 point per dollar at the end with the AdMech on the 40k one, I expect these will be much higher than that.
It might have been, but like, yeah, given the fact that there are like 600, 700 point models that are, you know, like, okay, maybe they still cost $150 to $200, but like it's almost half of a 2,000 point list on its own. That's not really a thing in 40k. Those types of things are going to change, especially when we look at the averages.
I'm also going to bet, just thinking about it, we're going to have a tighter delta between our top end and our bottom end for a like point per dollar, because one of the things we noticed with 40k was newer sculpt armies were more expensive, right?
Right.
AOS being a younger game with less old shit in it.
There's less of the like old pricing, new pricing.
I'm going to bet a lot of stuff is way closer together in points per dollar.
That makes sense. The only concern is that there are a bunch of armies that are still pretty small because AOS is a newer game, so they don't have like quite the range.
Yeah, a lot of AOS factions have way less units than 40k does, with the exception of like Stormcast and like Cities or someone else. Yeah, Cities is probably second. Maybe Skaven.
Oh, Skaven might be up there now, but even then.
Yeah, like other than those, I expect we have way less data sheets, much more like the smaller 40k factions where you only have like 15, 20 data sheets total. And I know in AOS they're not called data sheets. We're going to accidentally 40k a lot of things in every AOS episode.
Yeah, sorry. 40k brained or something like that. I think that's what kids say.
But there are less war scrolls or unit types. Battle Tome is book. Battle Formation is detachment. War Scroll is data sheet. War Hammer is 40,000.
Dumb.
Dumb.
So going back to like our guesses.
Yeah, let's get some hotter takes. I'm going to bet everything we said is true for sure.
So Sons of Behemoth, I would expect expensive, but it's going to be extreme on either end because there's only 8 models. So like it's either going to be super cheap or super expensive. There's just not enough war scrolls to be able to be like, yeah, we're right in the middle.
I think one thing is that one might have a thing in its favor with being all big models. And I bet we're going to see a lot of the best value kits be gods or, you know, like huge centerpiece model, because in AOS, like Nagash can be half the points of your friggin' army.
Right. And like an expensive model, but it's still pretty good for the point per dollar.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. And like the Horde armies are probably going to be expensive.
Yes, though to remember that was not always the case in 40k, because we had weird ones like Guard where it's a Horde army that has a bunch of vehicles and we don't weight the different data sheets. If there's 10 different Lehman Russes, that's 10 at that price range. If there's only one infantry kit, there's only one at that price range. So you will end up with weird data during this, where a Horde faction looks cheaper if you were to buy one of every type of model in that range and not 100 demonettes or whatever.
Yeah, we're not actually trying to figure out what's the cheapest faction to build an average 2K list.
Which is a great extra episode we could do one day.
Yeah.
Stay tuned, hit subscribe, yada yada, blah blah blah.
Wow.
The only time I'm going to remember it this episode, I had to do it.
Fair enough. That's an entire like additional step beyond just looking at, you know, the actual units and price and stuff like that. So it is possible that some of the more Horde armies are, you know, kind of averaged out by those like either like a big centerpiece model or, you know, a bunch of the monsters or something like that.
All right, that's enough of us trying to guess stuff. Let's actually get into the data. Get our hands dirty.
All right. Are we going to start cheapest and work most expensive, or do we want to flip it?
Let's try to follow how we did the 40k one. We started with the cheapest ones first, then we'll do the most expensive ones, and then we'll get into like the really cool stuff of like what's the best model to buy in each faction.
All right. Okay, so the cheapest factions.
I did not see that coming. Okay, we'll go up the cheapest. We'll do like 5 cheapest. So Blades of Khorne in 5th place is a whatever. It's at 3.37 points per dollar. Already you can tell like in 40k that would be nutty high.
Yeah, that's pretty pretty good.
As a reminder, like the 40k stuff, it is a different size game at the same 2k points. Like you have way more models on the table, so the numbers are worse. But like, let's go to like the crazy good ones here. Custodes. Oh god. Custodes was the cheapest in the game at 3.19. Fifth place here is 3.37.
Nice. That is expected because, yeah, AOS's 2K is not as many models, but it is telling.
We need smaller size armies in 40k. Fuck brickies of the world. You don't need to put 600 models on the battlefield. I want to finish the game today.
Sure.
But anyway, so Blades of Khorne, 5th place, sure. 4th place, this is an asterisk one. We got to talk about this. Soulblight Gravelords just came out with a battle tome. The battle tome is out. We've got the new points. However, the kits aren't being sold separately yet that were part of like combo boxes, and there's one or two that still have not been sold yet.
So it's complicated.
Lord Lazarus did his best to figure out what SBGL's points per dollar are going to end up being at the end of this.
Yeah.
It is formulaic. We know what the prices are based on everything else, but they aren't officially out yet, so it might be slightly different.
Yeah, unless they're going to try and like price hike a bunch of stuff at the same time. Usually it's pretty easy to guess what's going on.
Yeah. So this is most likely good data, but it could be off by a little bit.
But yeah, 3.59 points per dollar for Soulblight Gravelords. That's pretty good. And I mean, it's a solid jump from Blades of Khorne.
We do have to remember this is a very guard-like issue, though, of if your list has 100 zombies or 100 skeletons in it, it is not this cheap.
Yeah. There's a bunch of like big models that are definitely helping out quite a bit.
Yeah, like your elite units will make this a much better proposition. But I'm going to guess if I go here, yeah, Death Rattle skeletons are down at 1.6.
Yeah.
So your basic stuff is going to make this much more expensive than this looks on the tin. This is where stats can lie.
But, rough balanced army, you'll probably be okay.
Oh shit, 2nd and 3rd are a tie.
Yeah, it seems like it.
And you were right, one is Stormcast. Very well.
So yeah, Stormcast and Ossiarch Bone Reapers at 3.65 points per dollar.
That's really nice.
Kind of shocked about Ossiarch Bone Reapers.
I get that because they're more elite like Necrons. Necrons was one of the cheaper ones on 40k's end, and they are very similar armies of the undead regimented
You don't say.
Legion. Very similar.
Please put two images next to each other and show us how similar they are.
But anyway, so I expect that one to be high. So that makes sense. Stormcast being this high is great though, because they're your intro army, and having them be this high means that they're not like super bad to collect. There's the problem of they have 1 billion war scrolls. So that's going to be a different type of number when we get to like the cost of owning everything.
Right. Like if you're a completionist of like, I want to collect every.
Yeah.
If you're a card game collector and you're like, I want one of every card of that set, it's going to be a bit tough for some of these factions compared to others.
But yeah, both of these being this cheap is pretty nice.
It is interesting. Like I figured Stormcast would be pretty decent, but I was worried that like because they're the like intro army, a lot of my expectation being, oh, they're fairly affordable is because they have such discount, those intro army stuff. So like it's nice to see that they're still a cheaper faction without taking that into account. But yeah, there is one more cheapest faction, and this one's another big jump.
This one I wouldn't have guessed either because it's such a horde army. Well, actually thinking about it, so it's Nighthaunt, and thinking about it, I haven't followed in detail the balance updates of AOS, like other than playing some Spearhead every now and then. I do know Nighthaunt had a nutty index. They looked like they were Harlequins at their best / Chaos Demons when everyone hated them most in 9th. Very awkward to play against, and I assume part of the balance update was Point Oblivion.
Yeah, because their core rules were just doing things that were different than everybody else, like basically cheating on the rules.
When you have a rule that says play the game different than everybody else, it's very strong.
Yeah, or it's complete trash, but this one was very strong. And so like it's very possible that a lot of the points just like we have to balance it, but we don't want to like destroy the identity that the faction's built up, so we'll just have to make them cost more.
I know at one point they were like the Horde army, or one of the like 3 major Horde armies. So it's interesting that either these kits are very cheap for what you get, or they just are way higher points right now for balance reasons.
Right. I'm trying to look, because like it was the chain rasps. Points per dollar is 2.22, which is like, it's low for AOS we're seeing, but like that's not as low as I expected, honestly.
No, and a lot of the other like generic troops and stuff aren't that bad.
No, they're in a reasonable range for AOS. And then there's obviously some of the standout heroes, and like Nagash is going to be...
He's at 6 points per dollar. Let's go.
Honestly, he's going to be the outlier in all of those armies.
Yeah, all of death probably gets a noticeable spike from him, and we've got 3 death right here. That's interesting to think about, that you have something that might be kicking up your average alone like that.
Well, especially because, like, again, the amount of units in all of the factions are not massive. So, like, a single outlier can make changes. Nighthaunt's at a pretty good war scroll count, so it's not just Nagash saving everything, but...
Yeah, they were the 2nd edition Little Brother army, so they've got some play there.
But, like, 4.29 points per dollar is a hell of a jump from, like, everything else. And comparing it to 40k, it's hilarious. Custodies at 3.19 points per dollar, Nighthaunt 4.29. That is hilarious. But all right, let's flip it on its head now, though. Let's talk about the most expensive.
Do you want the most expensive from 40k? I've got the video up. Let me go check. So the bottom of the barrel for us was Drukhari was at sub 2, Leagues of Votann worse, Tau worse. We were down to Adeptus Sororitas at 1.59. Admech were at 1.49.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So 2,000 points was going to be like $1,500 more or less.
So I really doubt that anything's that bad. The real question is if anything goes down to like 2, right? Because again, this is AOS.
Yeah, that would still be $1,000 for a 2,000 point list.
Yeah, so like that would be an interesting cutting point, just arbitrary, I guess, because like it's a nice round number. But I guess we'll work towards it. The 3rd most expensive army.
Berilio, you have such expensive tastes.
Oh, it's Aiden Thiefkin. Paying him well, apparently.
Yeah. It's still not bad, though. 2.8, which, I mean, it's bad in AOS, but that's not as bad as I was expecting.
No.
Also, Delta-wise, remember, 5th cheapest out of 24 versus 3rd most expensive out of these 24 was 3.37 versus 2.8. Like I thought we would have. It's a much flatter curve than 40k was.
Yeah, it's not bad. Like, it's a noticeable difference, but, like, pretty reasonable around the, like, 3 points per dollar.
Yeah, we're dipping to what was still considered a green on my heat diagram in the 40k pricing.
So more expensive than Aiden Thiefkin goes to Gloomspite Gets, just barely 2.78 points per dollar.
And this one makes perfect sense. Horde army with a lot of Horde army options. Like there's not like with Guard in 40k where vehicles saved Guard from looking atrocious. This is a bunch of different Horde low quality units you have to buy.
Yeah, and they don't even have like Nagash to pull it up a little bit.
Kragnos, who I'm sure is probably still the cheapest in this army, but we'll get there.
Right, but like not quite the same, I don't think. It makes sense, but that leads us to the most expensive, and this is a big delta. Similar to the cheapest, the most expensive is all the way down at 2.32 points per dollar,
which is still really bad. That was middle of the road, actually that was damn near top 5 territory in 40k terms, but that's still, you're talking about an expensive army.
Yeah, okay, it's going to Sons of Behemoth.
You were right. I would not have put them here because Knights was one of the cheapest in 40k. But I guess Knights is one of the cheapest in 40k with an almost identical structure in AOS. They are slightly more expensive, so that makes it a little bit worse. And because of the difference in what we're looking at, that plummets it.
They're very similar to Knights. It's just Knights were reasonable in 40k compared to everything in 40k. Sons of Behemoth are not in the same league for comparing to AOS. It is a hell of a delta, though. Like, I knew it was going to be an outlier, but holy shit.
Yeah, so our most expensive army, you only get 2.32 points for every dollar you spend. Our cheapest army, you got 4.29. So you essentially get an extra 2 points for every dollar you put into the army.
Yeah, that's pretty good. It's like half off.
Yeah. And And this is without combo boxes and stuff. If you've got a good combo box, it can spike you crazy. Like, we're just talking about, like, on average, your war scrolls are costing you this.
Yeah. And taking a look, stepping back at like everything, I know you had brought up like the delta between, you know, the fifth cheapest and, you know, third most expensive was not that much, but like just generally looking at it, there's only two like major outliers, and that's Nighthaunt and Sons of Behemoth, and everything else is pretty well on the scale. Like there's a few jumps here and there, but like we're around 3 points per dollar, and then standard deviations, that's not bad. Everything's pretty well balanced price wise.
Yeah. One of the things this is like tickling my brain with, because I need more work to do, is $500 army episode for AOS is probably too easy to do. Because like this is just for like average. If you're like trying to sculpt a cheap 2K list,
Yeah.
we were trying our best to hit 540K. It was difficult to get a couple armies to do it alone. Whereas I bet this, I could slam most of them.
Yeah, and like the only real question is how balanced or how meta you can get it. Or like, are we're just taking literally the cheapest shit and saying, yeah, it's a playable list. I think it could be interesting to take a look at that.
Maybe coming soon.
Well, let us know in the comments if you're interested.
Holy shit, that was so natural. And I ruined it by talking about how impressed I am.
Hey, it's okay. It's good to be appreciated.
We're becoming YouTubers.
I wouldn't go that far. We haven't even shouted out the merch like we were supposed to. So I guess taking a look at just like general other faction kind of stuff, I don't know, like is there anything that really jumps out? Yeah, the elite Sons of Behemoth being, you know, 8 war scrolls. Yeah, sure. That's obviously an outlier.
Yeah, the thing that's killing them. So I'm quoting the knight prices and stuff and the custodes prices. Those were several price adjustments ago.
Right. Things are not as good as they were.
I have a feeling that like all of 40K's numbers just slant worse now. But like looking at it from a Sons of Behemoth standpoint, 187 for a single giant.
Given that they're like 400 points or something like that.
Yeah, they're like 440 for what I'm seeing here. But like going over to 40K, where you have a very similar pointed knight, yeah, it's 179 for a knight that's 400 points. So I bet it's just because we had the old prices compared to now.
Maybe it's a good thing we didn't update. It would just be disappointing.
Maybe we should go back and check 40K just for morbid curiosity.
That's true. So yeah, I guess other than that, I'm thinking Spearhead is like a lot of my experience with stuff. So I'm trying to think of like where were the more problematic Spearheads?
Well, the Spearheads have gotten updates. I don't know how much Lord Lazarus updated the Spearheads on the document here, but he has a page for it. So assuming these are updated, we still have them all. Though I know that Ogres is changing their Spearhead.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just thinking the more like Cities of Sigmar was a, you know, smaller point costed thing, just because like that's more like hoardy style of how Cities was. And yeah, I mean, it looks like Cities of Sigmar is at like 2.83 points per dollar. So it's one of the more expensive ones, but not the most expensive.
And there's interesting stuff of like Cities has basically the worst Spearhead. I'm not counting Suns because it's like Knights where it's like a not Spearhead. Cities is at 480 points only for their Spearhead. Whereas if you go to like, let's not even do the Ogres one or the Stormcast one, which are both legendary, but like Sylvaneth is a really good Spearhead at 750 points, which again is like plus 50% off the top of my head. So you can see the delta just between like Sylvaneth and Cities is huge for the what you get out of a Spearhead, which is a static price. And they're not that different in points per dollar MSRP wise without the Spearheads in consideration. So like when we're comparing these, using the extra things like is the Spearhead a good deal can mean a lot for the data.
Oh yeah, definitely. All right. I mean, I guess, do we all want to take a look at what like if you wanted to buy the range would cost?
Sure, it's a fun stat. So in 40K, there was like the buy 3 of everything and all that, but we'll just do what a ×1 is worth on all of these, knowing that then you have to take out your named characters and then you could buy infinite of any of them because there's not like rule of 3 or anything here.
Sure.
So let's do like what a one of the range costs.
And like quick expectations, the ones that have a larger range, so like more units, are going to cost more.
Yeah. We can talk about the actual count of war scrolls and all that. Technically, we can do the average cost of a war scroll just by figuring out what a ×1 is worth and how many war scrolls you got in a faction.
The most expensive one, that has to be Stormcast.
It has 77 war scrolls.
Cities is at like 50, and that's the next. And Skaven's somewhere in the same area. But like Stormcast has a very much an outlier amount of war scrolls.
And this is after culling a shitload of them.
Even the fact that it's like the third cheapest faction on average for your points per dollar. There's just so many of them that if you wanted to get one of each, you're gonna pay the most money.
So how much are we paying?
It looks like it would be about $4,700.
Which gets you 15,000 points of unique Stormcast entries.
That is honestly kind of wild.
You could play a small tournament of just all the Stormcast war scrolls against each other.
Hell yeah, dude. The truest Space Marine meta. This is what 40k really wants to be.
You just sprinkle in a couple basic troops, multiple copies so that everyone can run,
Like a valid list that isn't a meme.
Yeah, and you probably still have way too many characters no matter what. But you would end up at like 16,000 points with like those slight alterations, which means you could run 8 2K lists. You could run a small tournament.
Yeah, you could. That's wild.
Of just unique Stormcast sheets.
It's like almost $5,000, which is a lot of money. So yeah, it's a lot of units. So I guess the cost per unit, is that what you put down there?
Oh, yeah. This is the cost per unit on average over these multiple war scrolls. So this is saying on average, if you were to pick at random on GW Store, you're paying about $61.5 for a Stormcast Eternal random war scroll.
All right. I mean, that doesn't like mean anything at the moment, but this is the reference number.
It's to remind you that while this, yes, it costs almost $5,000 to own all the Stormcast, it's because there are so many. It's not that expensive for what a unit costs.
All right. Next down, Cities of Sigmar makes sense. Again, it's got the most sheets.
Yeah, it's 50 sheets, so second place after Stormcast. It does beat out the rats.
And this is going to be like $3,100.
Yeah, which ain't cheap, but it is 8,000 unique points of models, which is pretty damn good. That is a healthy spread of getting to be in one faction and have access to a bunch of crap. This is a bit awkward because Cities is kind of like the multiple armies in a trench coat meme. It is much more human focused, but there is the other stuff.
And there are ways to play it as balanced, so sure. And this is at like 62, so roughly similar to the Stormcast Eternal average.
Oh, this is interesting. Currently, post Battle Tome, Soulblight Gravelords now has one more war scroll than Skaven. But Skaven costs more money to own.
I wonder if part of that is like they're even newer models, so like they're just going to be top loaded of like these are the new fancy ones.
It could also be, as we warned, the Soulblight is a guesstimate on what they're going to cost. The numbers could have been a little too optimistic.
So Skaven's at like $2,400 to own one of every war scroll.
Which is, again, it's like 7,500 points, so it's still a lot of different types of rats. But again, this is also like one of everything, so you only have your 10 clan rats. You only have your 10 storm vermin.
Yeah, this is not the way to collect if you want to really like play AOS. This is how you would collect if you just want to be a collector and like you're putting them in shelves after you assemble and paint them and they're all really cool and it's like I own one of every unit. That's cool. Not really the playing thing though.
Again, this whole thought experiment is about the interesting data points around the finance of these games, not so much specific advice for what to buy.
Yeah. So next down is Gloomspite Gits, and that's kind of interesting because that was one of our most expensive factions.
Yeah, but you get a lot less points.
Yeah, and like there's only 30 of the sheets.
I mean, you say only 30, that's healthy in AOS.
Yeah, definitely healthy in AOS, but it's not even half of Stormcast Eternal. So it makes sense that it's still expensive. Yeah, okay. All right, you're one of the most expensive factions. I get it. Oh, that is fascinating. Actually, looking at the average cost on that one.
Here we go. Now we got an interesting result. $78 on average to get a random Gloomspite Git. That just doesn't seem possible. Dear God, a lot of these cost a ton. A Snarl Boss costs $100?
Yeah, it's second most expensive. And like, it's realistically the most expensive other than Sons of Behemoth.
Trug costs $105? I guess it's a little believable. It's not that big. Holy shit. You know when I said we could split a Gloomspite army? Hey, let's rethink that one.
Yeah, start a little bit easier. Maybe Iden of Thiefkin.
All right, so enough of the like top end ones for the Costo and everything. Let's look at some of the cheapest ones to own one of everything.
Okay, not really what I had expected. Caradron Overlord
I mean, I expect it somewhat because they've got what, 10 War Scrolls?
is 15. It's anemic, very much so. But they've got some big stuff, right? Like they got the big ships.
But they've only got like 2 of them.
That's true. Yeah, there's like one big one medium one, and one small one. All right, yeah, 10 scrolls is going to do that.
So between their 15 War Scrolls, they are on the cheaper end for actual what they cost on average at $55, but they're only $830 to own everything.
But you only get 2,600 points. You barely have enough.
Oof.
That's funny. Fire Slayers is not doing much better, though.
No, it's still under $1,000 though at only $972 for 3,000 points.
Yeah, another one of those 18 sheets.
Again, though, it's on the cheaper end to buy everything at $54 on average per sheet.
Then it's Iden of Thiefkin, and we already know that that's one of the more expensive factions. So the fact that they only have 15 scrolls is why it's only costing $1,000 to get one of every of them.
You get less points than Fire Slayers by 100 change. Oh, on average, it's $68. So it's like way higher than the other two that are cheap down here. It's literally just because there's so few War Scrolls.
Yeah, there's several others, like so Cruel Boys, Bone Reapers, Iron Jaws. Those are all, they have sub 20 War Scrolls.
Shout out for Bone Reapers, though. They've only got the 19 total War Scrolls. However, points-wise, it's 4.6k.
Nagash cheats.
Yeah, Nagash is the reason. That's why. He's going to push all sorts of stats.
That is still a very respectable amount of points, but taking a look, Sons of Bahamut, so we've talked about 15 War Scrolls, 18, 19, whatever. Sons of Bahamut only had 8, and to get one of each of those 8, $1,500.
Yeah.
An extra 500 over what we were looking at roughly for the one we were just talking about. So yeah, most expensive faction makes sense there. I enjoy the massive outlier that it has on
For the average amount you're paying per kit at $187 a kit.
Yeah, it's just like, all right, did you want a giant? This is what it costs. It's $180.
Okay. It's kind of interesting, though. So, like, for a grand total here, if you want to own one of everything in AOS, barring some weird numbers that are in here because of things like boxes that no longer exist or are only part of combo boxes and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, or like, there's probably some overlap.
Yeah, you would end up with multiple Nagashes, yeah, because of how this works. But whatever. You would have to spend $41,636.42 before tax.
Fucking hell, that's a lot of money.
But you get 656 War Scrolls worth of stuff, and several of those are Nagash.
That's true. 126,000 points. You just have entire rooms worth of models.
That's like actually kind of cool. Just from a like imagining like 600 plus different unit types.
A lot of them are going to be Stormcast Eternal.
But outside of that, like just like looking around, a lot of them would just randomly look different because there's so much character to all of the different factions.
Very true. So on average, your faction is looking at like 27 unique sheets. Stormcast Eternal and Sons of Bahamut are skewing those numbers noticeably. But 27, that seems like a reasonable number. If all of these lower ones, like Caradron Overlords and Iden of Thiefkin, went up to like 27, that would be cool.
I mean, that's what I hope for in 40k for the most part. We don't have that on 40k's end either. Half of the Xenos have chaos as...
Half of the Xenos are just like chaos.
Yeah. Anyone who's not the Imperium right now. But honestly, for one last interesting stat here, looking at it, we didn't discuss this with the most expensive and cheapest armies. The average points per dollars of AOS currently is 3.16 points per dollar. That's not bad when you consider how awful 40k was. Remember, the best army in 40k a price jump ago was 3.2.
Yeah. And then so like it's basically the average for AOS.
So if 40k is too expensive for you, AOS is a much, much better idea.
And I mean, that's basically true for everything. Like even the most expensive AOS are not that like crazy for compared to 40k, ignoring Sons of Bahamut. But like the other ones are in the same realm roughly. So definitely something to keep in mind if you're on a budget. But But if you're on a budget, also, don't just buy straight from GW. Get the discounts, get the discount boxes, all that stuff.
Yeah, check eBay, secondhand, all that stuff. Go watch our practical $500 episode redo we did, where we showed tricks. Like, do stuff like that if you're on a budget.
All right, we've done a lot of rough guidelines and, high level stuff. Let's dig down into the individual kits, the best value for each faction.
Okay, let's do best value for everybody, and we can point out some of the worst that are like hilariously bad.
Okay.
Or are funny ones to be worst. Again, I called it just scanning over this. There are a lot of gods and main centerpiece models on the best value kits here, just because AOS will let you run an 800 point model that is worth 800 points. For 40k players in the audience, it's kind of wild to say things like that. So what order do we want to go in, Eric? I guess let's just do it by Grand Alliance.
Cities of Sigmar, then.
Their best value kit is a sorceress.
Sure. Yeah, it's like 130 points or something like that and like $20 and not like real. This one's an old world
Okay,
model.
this is the old fine cast sorceress. Oh no, she's plastic. Oh, that's some old plastic. It's not even that old. It's 2010. We've seen worse.
Fair.
She's almost as new as the entire Grey Knights range.
Fuck off. So yeah, given the amount of points is, high character stuff, and it's like $19 because it's old and a square base, 6.8 points per dollar. Sure. It's an obvious outlier. Ignoring that one, it goes down to Warden King.
I do suspect on a lot of these, we're about to see the old world models being the cheapest one in factions that have any old world models. If you have old world models, those are clearly going to be your cheapest models.
Yeah, so as new as AOS is, there's still some holdover. Not all of them are like terrible.
It doesn't mean they're bad, but it does mean that, yeah, it's going to be a mix of gods and old models.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so on the flip side from best value, what's the worst value kit?
The free killed steel helms, which makes sense because they're a basic troop that is a brand new sculpt, and that always gets hit the worst.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. They are a pretty basic troop, but they still cost, what, $58?
58 buckaroonies.
So 1.55 points per dollar.
That's like AdMech bad. That's bad.
That is bad. And that's the kind of thing that immediately when like thinking about Cities of Sigmar of like what's most expensive, what's least expensive, is like, oh, it's Cities is going to be fucked because of stuff like this. And it's like, well, there's more to it.
Yeah, there's stuff that makes cities look less bad, like all the stuff in Old World where the whatever dispossessed are called, right? They're like
Sure.
$85, but you get 20 of them. So it makes the pricing not look as bad for cities, when in reality, most of what you're going to buy is on this really bad end.
Yeah.
Value-wise, looks-wise, phenomenal. All of the new stuff looks beautiful.
Yeah. But like even like Steam Tank is still like 3.25 points per dollar. So yeah, not everything's all bad, but there are definitely free guild steel helms show off that you can spend a lot of money on cities. All right, let's move on to Daughters of Cain.
And here, again, it's the Blood Cauldron kit, like any of those builds. They end up as your best value. Witch Elves end up as your worst value. This is not really a shock. Ignoring like Hag Queen and Slaughter Queen, which are like piddly little $20 old characters like we were saying, third place here would go to Marathi Kane. And Witch Elves are in nearly dead last here as your like basic troop of this army. This is going to be the pattern throughout these, and it's why we probably aren't going to mention every worst model here, but firing a little faster through these as we go now. Fire Slayers, the Auric Rune Master, is our best value here. The Magma Droths taking second place is really nice.
It is. They're not quite as good as like Marathi on the points per dollar, but they're quite up there.
Meanwhile, Hearthguard Berserkers in our worst spot, as you would predict.
But 2 points per dollar, it could be worse.
We're seeing a lot of the worst cases with these more finessey armies, whereas when you're on something like Dwarves, they got some beef.
All right, Iden the Thiefkin, you're one of the average most expensive, but there's some decent options here. Like Isharan Tidecaster, your like general leader, it's pretty cheap for solid points, makes sense.
And Volthranos, for your main character of the faction, is super good points per dollar. Even the Leviathan is up here in the top few.
Hell yeah.
You know what's in last place is the Namardis.
Yeah, the thralls are all the way down at like 1.67.
Yeah. And again, this is how I expect all of these to end up, especially for finesse armies. KO, we get a named character up top, and at the bottom, we get things like the Endrin Riggers.
The troops, essentially. So it follows pretty well. So Lumineth Realm Lords up at the top is Severeth.
The Flying Kangaroo Bull.
Yeah.
Their whole top end here is pure characters. The worst, though, is actually interesting this time. It's the Ballista.
Yeah. Which, like, there's a decent amount of, like, infantry troops that could have been, right? Like,
Yeah, the ones above that are infantry, but the Ballista getting last is kind of cool.
it is funny. Yeah, 1.8 points per dollar, which, yeah, I mean, that one seems like it could change quite easily. You know, like, you just make it slightly better and increase it by 30 points and, you know, things, since it's just a single unit. But it is neat that it isn't just troop. Seraphon.
Seraphon's got some weird ones because technically like a Riperdon chief or a Pterodon chief, but they're part of a kit that you have to tear apart for them. So like really it's the Bastillodon more or less when we get down to it.
That kind of makes sense. I'm slightly surprised Croxigor weren't.
They're close.
Okay. Because, like, even though they're infantry, they're pretty elite and they're a 3 unit. So,
The funny one is the Warband is in last place here with the Hunters of Watchley / Terrawings, but it's awkward because they share a kit.
oh,
So ignoring them, it's Pterodon Riders.
sure. That makes sense. It was either that or Skinks, maybe.
Skinks, Pterodons, they're down at the bottom there. Which is funny because the chief's up top, but it has to tear apart a Pterodon kit, which makes it real awkward, and that's why the prices are so funky. So yeah, you could spiritually, if you get rid of the weirdness, you could say Skinks are worst, which is basically the expected outcome there of a basic troop.
So, Stormcast.
Stormcast have some crazy ones.
Yeah, some, like, ridiculous points per dollar. Retributors at 8.5.
Okay, part of this is because, like, they're the beginner army. There is a billion copies of their basic crap. And, like, they come in all sorts of combo boxes, and that's the only way to get them.
Yeah.
So, like, looking at stuff like, yeah, so it's like Retributors, Lord Castellan, Yndrasta, all of these are really high up. But again, it's like, these come in combo boxes like crazy. They're actually, like, even cheaper than they look here if you just go on eBay.
Right.
In worst, we have the Lord Arcanum / Aventus Firestrike, the guy on the hippogriff looking thing.
It's a pretty cool model, but you're paying for it.
It's not worth many points, and it's one of the centerpiece $180 kits.
And that does show, like, the other end of, like, usually these centerpiece models are a lot of points, even though they're expensive, you know, $180 centerpiece models, but they're shitloads of points. If they're not, you really feel it, though. These guys are only, like, 300 points, so not the most price efficient.
And Sylvaneth, the Branch Witch, which again, old world shitty character in first place. While Spite Revenants, your low-end, expensive to buy troop is sitting there at the bottom.
Yeah, the Sprite Revenants are really, really quite bad. 1.38.
And they're ones that I used in Drukhari to do kit bashing. Huzzah!
Oh, Drukhari. Yeah, I mean, they're still cheaper than Drukhari.
I also used the Witch Elves, which we covered as some of the worst things to buy from Doc.
All right, Blades of Corn up next.
These are going to have weird numbers because Blades of Corn has some out-of-stock characters who are like parts of old combo boxes that don't exist and weird stuff. But basically, the best one that isn't like asterisked here is Bloodletters. Unfortunately, it's a hideous old world kit. Say this is someone who has painted a lot of Bloodletters. Fuck that kit.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Worst is Blood Reavers, which is the mortal, normal guys. Claws of Karanak down there as well as the Warband, which also makes sense.
Honestly, it brings up, like, Karanak is quite bad, but I figured it'd be worse.
A lot of the Warbands are going to be down there because they're expensive and they are not many points to field. They're mostly going to sit in this bottom area on every one we go through.
All right, so Zinch.
Oh, Zinch. So Magister on disc, okay, that's a really good value. It's like 6.8 points per dollar, really high.
Yeah, Magister itself also pretty high.
Shockingly, this is where we get like big centerpiece models who are really middle of the road price-wise with like the Lord of Change. But down at the bottom, we have Chaos Spawns, a legendarily bad kit to purchase, even in 40k, and in AOS, it's horrendous at essentially $1 a point.
It's actually really bad.
Zongor Enlightened down here as well at 1.5.
Definitely not good for Zongor Enlightened either. Like, that's still a problem. And in comparison to a bunch of the other previous factions that we talked about, they're like, oh, this is the expensive troop, Zongor Enlightened. And then Chaos Spawn's like, hey, look what I could do.
You know what's middle of the road is Zongor. I bet they could put them into a lot of combo boxes and call it a really good value. Wait a second.
Yeah, it seems like a brilliant idea. All right, so Hedonites of Slaanesh, you've got the Hellflayers. So that's like the chariots, and all the chariots are under the gun, essentially.
Questionable playability in the future.
Which, like, I could totally see them redoing, reboxing, whatever for AOS a lot more than I could see that happening for 40k as well. So, like, maybe, but if they do that, it's probably going to be more expensive just because that's what you do. So, right now, not too bad.
But down at the worst is actually named characters, and centerpiece ones at that, is Dexessa and Slanessa.
Easy to say.
One try every time.
Right. Yeah, they're
just not worth many points, and they're like a big centerpiece model.
Exactly. I don't hate how they look, though.
No, they're beautiful.
It's always tough when I'm like, I kind of like this model, and it is like a nice like centerpiece model, and you look at it and you're like, it's not that many points, and then we see this like points per dollar kind of like efficiency of your spending, and you're like, oh, that's like 1.57 points per dollar. Oh no. Yeah. So Maggotkin of Nurgle, Lord of Plagues?
Yeah, so it's a generic foot hero for the cheapest one. More interestingly, at the bottom here, our bottom three for Nurgle are all fun. Horticlix Slimix, who is a demon character who looks beautiful, but is a terrible purchase. Worse than that is the legendarily bad Beast of Nurgle, which is better in AOS because it's a more elite unit here, but it's $58 for 130 points of a single model.
That was the obvious, like, this is going to be the bad.
It's a lot better than in 40k where it's like $58 buys you a 40-point piece of shit. It's better in 10th, but in 9th, that's what it was.
Fair. But it's apparently not the worst.
The worst is, again, another warband. It's the Rotmire Creed. And they are like a frail, not very Nurgly unit, which is why you have them at so few points.
Right. But they're like, I think they're like Warcry or whatever.
Yep, they're a Warcry warband.
So more expensive. You know, it's not one of those like, oh, super cheap, but they do look nice. Skaven.
All right, rats.
This one should be interesting given they had a shitload of old garbage.
Okay, first place is listed as Night Runners. Did they get legends when they got... I don't know.
I don't think they did.
Okay. But other than them, the new Kridak Foulblade, beautiful model. That character is the best points per dollar right now.
So the Night Runners still exist. The Gutter Runners, which are like the same thing, essentially, were legend.
Okay, Gutter Runners was the meme one.
So like, yes, they still exist, but also half of them don't if you just built them wrong or whatever.
So I guess Night Runners, or if you're not a fan of the monkey rats, then you have Kridak. But down at worst, we've got the Acolyte Globadiers, which are $58 for 100 points, and somehow this is a way better deal than they were, because they were the famous outlier of a single metal model you needed 5 of to make a single unit.
Right.
They were like hilarious before the refresh.
Storm Vermin aren't doing much better though.
No, they're not, which is sad because I love them.
I mean, they're really nice and you're paying for it, but they're shockingly not that many points.
I mean, they're not shockingly not many points. They're horrendously bad.
They're elite for rats.
Okay, I get your point. You're saying they're elite for rats. I'm like, yeah, they're not elite, bro.
No. They're nowhere near a Swordcast Eternal, okay? Like, we're not, but on the scale of rat.
Sure, when compared to things like clan rats.
Exactly. Which, honestly, not the worst. Clan rat's up at 2.8, so not bad, not bad.
So let's talk about STD, video demonetized. For STD, we've got the Gaunt Summoner in first, or if you don't want to use like a Zinch model, Chaos Chosen, which is a beautiful unit. And worse, again, Chaos Spawn, because anyone who can run Chaos Spawn, they're going to be down here.
Sure.
The Chaos Legionaries, your basic dudes, also a terrible point per dollar value. Shockingly, somehow worse than Dark Oath Marauders.
Honestly, all three of those are embarrassing.
But Dark Oath Marauders are essentially AOS cultists.
It's not looking particularly great down there. There's poor value. And honestly, yeah, a couple of these I'm not a huge fan of the models anyway, so whatever.
All right, let's go on to death.
This should be interesting.
Wow, look at that.
It's Nagash.
Let's just real quick. I just want to see, is it a Nagash sweep? No, but he's really high on all the ones that he didn't just flat out win. So for FEC, it is Nagash.
And yeah, by a pretty decent margin.
And in last place, we have another Warcry Warband with the Royal Beast Flayers.
Crypt Guard aren't too bad. Like, they're still down there at sub 2.
Ugly ass kit.
Yeah. All right, Night Haunt. Apparently not Nagash sweep here. Tomb Banshee. Old shitty kit.
Karen Wraith is second place, which is another just very generic old character. So we've got some old world era stuff. Then you get down to like Nagash. Technically, the Mirrormorn Banshees beat out Nagash, even though, because they're so cheap.
Yeah. Down at the bottom, though. Black Coach. Represent.
It's kind of shocking because like it's a big centerpiece model. But again, it's a big centerpiece model that's not many points, which will instantly gut its score here.
Yeah. Like, it's Nagash tier pricing. So it's not like the most expensive, but there are some centerpiece models that are like 120-ish. Black Coach is like the 145. So yeah, it's a sweet model though.
Yeah, and just above that, you've got Pyregeist, which again is another Warcry unit. So OBR, Nagash does take first, but ignoring him.
He's such an outlier in this one.
He is. But you've got Vok Morton in first place for like normal stuff here. And then Catacross, which again, big centerpiece guy.
Honestly, his price is pretty low given the points, but I think he's an older model a little bit.
I just think he's not as big of a centerpiece. He's more a dude on a big base.
Sometimes it's hard to tell, but I mean, like, you get like 5 people on him, right? Like,
yeah,
he's got a bunch of dudes.
And last place again is a new Warcry Warband, the Terractic Cohort or whatever.
Soulblight.
Necromancer being an old world shitty character on foot makes sense to be in first place here. Otherwise, it's Prince Vordry.
And then Nagash.
Yeah, and then down at the bottom,
Death Rattle.
It's the classic Death Rattle skeletons. Gorgeous as they are, they're very expensive for very few points. And Fellbats just behind them, second to last place, being beautiful little models, but very expensive for a very non-elite unit.
I forgot about the Fellbats.
Oh, they're cool, because they're like actually kind of big.
Yeah, but like I had completely, it was like, it's the skeletons. It's going to be like by a mile, it's the skeletons. And then it's like, no, Fellbats are also pretty terrible for point efficiency.
All right, and moving in to destruction, the Gits. Scragrot, the Loon King in first place makes sense, named character.
A bunch of the characters are going to be up, especially because there are not that many big point models. Like, you've got Kragnos, but everything else is pretty cheap on the point side. So it's all about how much the actual kit is.
Down at the bottom, we have the pain and suffering that is everything that's part of the new wolf part of the army. Like, dead last is the Stun Steeler Wheelers, then is the Doom Diver Catapults, then Snarl Pack Cavalry. It's literally all the new models are not elite in any way, but are so expensive.
Yeah, the Sunsteel Wheelers are $92. They're really cool. I think they look awesome.
But they're $92.
They're $92.
You could buy like half of one Nintendo game.
Oh no. But yeah, again, it's just because like Gloomspite kits are not elite. So yeah, it's all it's 100 points. So, you know, kits that cost $60 or $100 just from a point per dollar is not going to do well. But let's take a look at the Ogre Maw tribes.
Ogres, I know, will have a ton of asterisks here for people because there are ways to kit bash a bunch of stuff and all that. And there's a lot of older models who look like other older models and are only like a weapon swap away from being a different unit. However, talking at face value here.
Yeah, we've got Iron Guts up at the top.
Yeah, the Iron Guts official kit is like $45, but it's like a big elite unit.
Yeah.
And again, it gets confusing because like you can kit bash Iron Guts out of generic kits. So like to some people, they're flat out free.
Right, because like you just have to be able to have like, oh, this is a bellower.
Yeah, but below them is the Iron Blaster, and below that is the Frost Lord on Stonehorn. But then on the bottom end, we've got Man-Eaters, technically the official kit. If you were to do that to yourself, don't. The Icefall Yetis, those fine cast ass models, don't.
That one, yeah.
The Slaughter Master, fine cast model, don't.
Really don't. There's a lot of Ogre Maw tribes that just don't. And like, even if they were decent values, there's a bunch that are just like, don't. Tough one there.
Let's move on to Cruel Boys.
So up at the top, we've got the Killaboss on Great Nash Tooth.
And in the bottom slot, we've got the Killaboss on Corpse Ripper.
Yeah, it's interesting how it does that, isn't it?
It's almost like you only have 3 units that just get on different mounts.
Yeah, kinda. The Manscure Bolt Boys being, the next worst, essentially, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, they are, at least, again, like with Cruel Boys here, secondhand value can save you a lot here. Iron Jaws. Your best is just a generic Mega Boss, which is, your average character, whereas a brand new sculpt with the weird Brute Rekkas in last place makes perfect sense.
Honestly, not that much at like the really efficient end here for Iron Jaws, which I guess makes sense. Newer.
Yeah, they just got a big refresh, so a bunch of those are expensive, so yeah.
Because like a bunch of the factions have those here's the 5 outliers or 3 outliers depending on how many War Scrolls you have. But Iron Jaws, their outlier, the Mega Boss, is still only 4.2 points per dollar. And then ending it out with Sons of Bahamut. They're all not good value, but Kragnos is the best of the not good value.
It's funny how bad his value is compared to a bunch of the other gods that have been in this list.
Yeah.
580 points for $180 is it's fine for a god, but compared to some of the others.
Then you look at Nagash and it's almost 6 points per dollar.
Or Archaon is 4.5. But yeah, so Kragnos in first place here, and of course the little giants in last place, which is a hideous kit to begin with, but everything else being almost identical because it's all one kit.
Yeah, dude, it's interesting overall how much.
Actually, I guess when you buy the Gargants as the 3, they're middle of the road. It's only really bad if you buy only one of the little giants.
Yeah, it is interesting, looking back over all of it, how stark it is compared to 40k. And it's in a good direction, right? If you're freaked out by 40k, take a look at AOS. It'll help out. It's still expensive. It can still definitely be expensive, but
I want to give a shout out. We're not going to cover it on this episode, but in Lord Lazarus' document here, he's got a whole tab for the Spearheads with buying advice for new people. And I really appreciate that. And maybe we'll recover Spearheads again for a value proposition standpoint for buying multiples to start an army. We might wait because currently they're in the middle of redoing a bunch of them, but we'll see. That may be a future topic.
But yeah, definitely, if you're interested in poking around data, take a look at the link in the description. If you really want to poke at it, just remember make a copy of it and then you can do whatever you want to the data.
Yeah, don't request edit access on stuff people provide for you. We're never going to give you it. Please stop requesting random editing access to things I host.
It's pretty easy. Just make a copy and then it's in your drive and you can do whatever you want.
And then if you do a good job, you could email whoever makes it and point out what you changed and fixed for them so they can implement it on the main one safely and not give random edit access to a 14-year-old.
Yeah, so definitely take a look. It's fun poking around data like this.
Yeah, you can find all sorts of interesting data points and stuff like this. We did a really a broad overview, fun, really quick numbers, but you could crunch in here if you want to.
Oh yeah. And it doesn't really all of this doesn't really matter. It's one of those you buy the models that look cool and are fun and all that, but it's kind of fun to just poke data and see what happens.
And it's always fun to have a little bit of bitching ammo to prove how expensive your army is versus your buddy's army.
That's true. Or, on the flip side of how efficient you are at finding deals.
Or planning out a new army and being it's not that expensive. I could do it.
I could buy every War Scroll. I just have to not buy a house. It's fine.
Look, it's one of the more expensive armies, but I like the cheaper part of it, so it's not that bad.
Exactly.
Me looking at Gloomspike Gets going. Yeah. Look, it's one of the most expensive armies, and one of the parts I like is the most expensive part. Shit.
Yeah. Shit. What was I trying to defend? Ignore all of that. I'm gonna buy it.
Take my credit card.
Yeah, that's about right. That's about right.
All right, that does it for this big topic at hand. I want to once again thank Lord Lazarus for making this for us, and if anything we presented is wrong, feel free to complain to someone who isn't me. It's really nice to not be at fault for a change. Normally I have to pretend it's Berilio's fault and it was screwed up in editing.
So remember, if there's anything wrong, blame Berilio.
True. But while we're here thanking people, we should thank the rest of our patrons who keep this place running. If you want to join them, patreon.com/SullySingleton. It would mean a lot right now. But you could join great patrons like Pitus9.
We also have producers. They are TNO, Recreational Red 40 Enthusiast,
Atherian the Infinite,
Bender XX,
Blisted Brain.
Brad actually secretly loves Space Marines.
Hey,
Yeah,
you ever wonder why we're here?
it's one of life's great mysteries, isn't it? Brad's Space Fools are cool. Just look at Adepticon previews.
You have to change this next month. Brandon Janke,
Broken Reaper 45,
Corvus,
Dr. Lace,
Gilgamesh Versus,
Young Guy C,
Jason McMaster,
Kiwi Fruitbird,
Le Bloop Bloop,
my stomp a docked all my bullets away,
Mr. Squiggums.
Mr. Festastic, hashtag where's Mike's Baneblade,
Where is it, Eric? NCS Go,
NJ Harlan,
One-Eyed Hive Mind,
Pizza 00100.
Primaris Purifier Squad 08.
Finally, I didn't have to say it. Sebastian Richardson,
That Moiety,
Victorian Batman.
and Wargame Simulator. Thank you all so much for keeping us afloat.
Yeah, thank you for the support.
That does it for us this week, though. We are out of here.
Sounds good.